Imagine a world without Wi-Fi, without Bluetooth, without GPS, without the secure wireless communications that connect billions of people every single day. Now imagine that the foundational technology behind all of these innovations came not from a team of scientists in a government laboratory, but from the mind of a woman whom Hollywood once called the most beautiful woman in the world. This is the story of Hedy Lamarr, born Hedwig Kiesler in Vienna, Austria, in 1914. She was a woman who defied every expectation placed upon her. A woman who escaped a controlling marriage to an arms dealer, who fled the rise of fascism in Europe, who became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, and who, in her spare time between film takes, invented a technology that would revolutionize global communications. Yet for decades, the world knew only half of her story. They saw the glamorous actress on the silver screen. They didn't see the woman with an estimated IQ of 140, working late into the night on inventions at her home laboratory. They didn't know about the patent she held for a secret communication system that could have changed the course of World War II if only the United States Navy had listened. This is the complete story of Hedy Lamarr, actress, inventor, refugee, patriot, and visionary. It is a story about what happens when society refuses to see past a woman's beauty to recognize her brilliance, and what happens when that brilliance finally receives its due. Vienna, 1919. The city that had once been the glittering capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was now struggling to find its footing in a transformed world. The Great War had ended just a year before, the empire had collapsed, and the grand boulevards and coffee houses of Vienna carried the weight of uncertain times. But in a comfortable apartment in the upscale Derbling district, a 5-year-old girl named Hedwig. Hedy, to her family, was far more interested in understanding how things worked than in the troubles of the outside world. On this particular day, she had acquired a music box. Most children would have been content to wind it up and listen to its tinkling melody. Hedy was not most children. She took it apart. Piece by piece, she dismantled the delicate mechanism, examining every gear, every spring, every tiny component that made the music play. And then, remarkably for a child so young, she put it back together again. The music box worked just as it had before. This was not the behavior of an ordinary child, and Hedy Kiesler was not born into an ordinary family. Her father, Emil Kiesler, was a successful banker, eventually becoming a director at one of Vienna's most prominent financial institutions. He was a tall, handsome man with dark hair graying at the temples and striking blue eyes that his daughter would inherit. More importantly for young Hedy's development, Emil was a deeply curious man who believed in nurturing his daughter's mind. In an era when daughters of wealthy families were expected to learn piano, practice their dancing, and prepare for advantageous marriages, Emil Kiesler did something revolutionary. He treated his daughter as an intellectual equal. He would take her on long walks through the Vienna woods, the beautiful forested hills surrounding the city, and during these walks, he would explain how the world worked. How does the streetcar move? What makes the printing press work? Why does the steam engine need water? These were the questions Emil encouraged, and these were the questions he answered with patience and enthusiasm. The walks could last for hours, father and daughter deep in conversation about machines, technology, and the mechanisms that made modern life possible. Hedy's mother, Gertrude, known as Trude, came from a cultured Hungarian Jewish family in Budapest. She was a talented concert pianist who had given up her career to raise her only child. Where Emil cultivated Hedy's scientific curiosity, Gertrude introduced her to the arts. Piano lessons, ballet, the theater, young Hedy was surrounded by culture and creativity from her earliest years. The combination proved potent. Hedy grew up with an unusual dual fluency. She could appreciate a Beethoven sonata and disassemble a mechanical device with equal enthusiasm. She was beautiful, winning a beauty contest in Vienna at age 12, but her mind was always working, always questioning, always seeking to understand. Years later, Hedy would remember this childhood as a kind of paradise. I was growing up wanting nothing more than what I already had, she reflected. Her father told her fairy tales by the fireside in winter, took her on adventures in the forest in summer, and always encouraged her to think. It was an upbringing that would serve her well. The girl who learned to take apart music boxes would one day take apart the most complex problems of military communications. The child who walked through the Vienna woods with her father would one day design a system to guide torpedoes through the dark waters of the Atlantic. But first, she would have to navigate a world that was determined to see only her face, never her mind. By the time Hedy was 16, the pull of the theater had become irresistible. She was attending the prestigious Derblinger Mädchenmittelschule, but her heart was elsewhere. At every opportunity, she would slip away to watch rehearsals at Max Reinhardt's famous dramatic school in Berlin, one of the most influential theatrical institutions in the German-speaking world. Reinhardt, a legendary director who would later flee the Nazis and help shape American theater, immediately recognized something special in the young Viennese girl. He gave her small parts in his productions. It was her first taste of the spotlight, and she was hooked. At 17, Hedy made her film debut in a small role in the German production Money on the Street. More films followed. She was learning her craft, growing more confident before the camera. The directors noticed her extraordinary screen presence. The camera loved her face, those large, dark eyes, the perfect bone structure, the mysterious quality that made it impossible to look away. Then came ecstasy. In 1933, Czech director Gustav Machety cast the 18-year-old Hedy in a film called Ecstasy. It was an artistic, sensual drama about a young woman trapped in an unhappy marriage to an older man who falls in love with a younger engineer. The film would make Hedy Lamarr famous across Europe, but not in the way anyone expected. Machety filmed scenes that were shocking for their time, brief moments of nudity, and most scandalously, a close-up of Hedy's face during what appeared to be an orgasm, the first ever shown in a mainstream film. Hedy later claimed she had been deceived about how these scenes would be used, that the director had employed powerful telephoto lenses without her full understanding of what would appear on screen. The film won an award at the Venice Film Festival and was hailed as an artistic achievement in Europe. In America, it was banned. Pope Pius XII condemned it. Hitler banned it in Germany. Women's groups protested. Hedy Lamarr, still a teenager, found herself at the center of an international scandal. The notoriety attracted a particular kind of attention. Among those who saw the film and became obsessed with its star was Fritz Mandl, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Austria. Fritz Mandl was everything Hedy was not. Where she was young and idealistic, he was calculating and ambitious. Where she was creative and curious, he was ruthless and possessive. He was the head of the Hürtenberger Patronenfabrik, Austria's largest munitions company, and he was known throughout Europe as the Merchant of Death. He was also 33 years old to her 19, and he was determined to possess her. Mandl had seen Hedy performing in the stage play Sissy, about Empress Elizabeth of Austria, and he had been transfixed. He sent roses to her dressing room. He insisted on meeting her. He pursued her with the same single-minded focus he brought to his arms deals. Hedy's parents were alarmed. They knew of Mandl's reputation, not just his wealth, but his political connections. He was a key supporter of the Austro-fascist movement, close friends with Prince Ernst Rudiger Starhemberg, the leader of the paramilitary Heimwehr militia. He sold weapons to Mussolini's Italy. Though his own father was Jewish, Mandl had converted to Catholicism and cultivated relationships with Nazi Germany's emerging power structure. But Hedy, young and perhaps naive, was swept up by Mandl's charm, his wealth, and his fascinating world. In August 1933, just months after the ecstasy scandal, she married Fritz Mandl at the historic Karlskirche in Vienna. She converted to Christianity for the ceremony. She was 19 years old. It was, as she would later describe it, like being collected. Mandl didn't want a wife, he wanted a possession. "I knew very soon that I could never be an actress while I was his wife," Hedy later recalled. "He was the absolute monarch in his marriage. I was like a doll. I was like a thing, some object of art which had to be guarded and imprisoned, having no mind, no life of its own." Mandel immediately ended her acting career. He was reportedly so obsessed with suppressing ecstasy that he spent a fortune trying to buy every existing print of the film. Benito Mussolini owned a copy and refused to sell it to him at any price. He installed Hedy in Villa Feggenberg, his castle in the Austrian countryside, far from Vienna's theatrical world. He kept her short of cash to control her movements. He demanded she attend to his social and business obligations, smiling and silent, the beautiful trophy wife presiding over dinners with arms dealers and fascist politicians. But Mandel made one critical miscalculation. He underestimated his young wife's intelligence. The dinner parties at Villa Mandel were legendary. Politicians, industrialists, military officers, and scientists gathered around Fritz Mandel's table to discuss the weapons that would shape the coming war. Adolf Hitler himself reportedly attended some of these gatherings. So did Benito Mussolini. And at the end of the table, silent and seemingly decorative, sat Hedy. What none of these powerful men realized was that the beautiful young woman they dismissed as Mandel's trophy was absorbing every word. Her father had taught her to understand machines. Now she was learning about weapons, specifically about the cutting-edge military technology of the 1930s. She learned about guided missiles. She learned about remote-controlled torpedoes. She learned about the single greatest problem facing radio-controlled weapons: jamming. If an enemy could determine the radio frequency controlling a torpedo, they could broadcast interference on that frequency and send the weapon harmlessly off course. Mandel took Hedy to his factories. He showed her his operations. He introduced her to his engineers and scientists, perhaps to impress her, perhaps because he saw her as no more threatening than a piece of furniture. In a business meeting, she later recalled, men spoke freely in front of her precisely because they didn't believe a woman could understand what they were discussing. They were wrong. The girl who had taken apart her music box, who had walked through the Vienna woods learning about machinery from her father, was taking apart the complex world of military technology in her mind. Every conversation, every technical discussion, every piece of information about torpedoes and radio waves and frequency jamming went into storage, waiting for the day when she would use it. Meanwhile, her imprisonment was becoming unbearable. "It was his game to hold me captive," she later wrote. "It was my game to escape." By 1937, Hedy had been married to Mandel for 4 years. She had made multiple attempts to escape, all unsuccessful. Mandel's control was total. He had guards, he monitored her movements, he kept her isolated. The details of her final escape have become the stuff of legend, with different versions told over the years. In one account, she drugged a maid who resembled her, stole the maid's clothes and identity papers, and fled in the night. In another, she persuaded Mandel to let her wear her finest jewelry to a dinner party, then slipped away and caught a late train to Paris. Whatever the truth, by the summer of 1937, Hedy Lamarr had crossed the border into France. She was 23 years old. She had escaped with little more than the jewels on her person and the knowledge in her head. Behind her lay a controlling husband, a dying marriage, and a continent sliding toward catastrophe. Ahead of her lay an uncertain future. From Paris, she made her way to London. And in London, she encountered the man who would give her a new name and a new life: Louis B. Mayer, the most powerful studio head in Hollywood. Mayer was in Europe scouting for talent when he met the young Austrian refugee. He was aware of the ecstasy scandal, and as a notoriously prudish man, he initially wanted nothing to do with her. "A woman's body is for her husband," he reportedly told her, "not the entire world." But Hedy was as shrewd in negotiation as she was intelligent in science. She booked passage on the same ocean liner taking Mayer back to America, the SS Normandy. During the crossing, she worked on him relentlessly. By the time they reached New York, she had a contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at $500 a week, more than Mayer's original offer, for 7 years. She also had a new name. Mayer wanted to distance his new star from her scandalous past, so he rechristened her after one of his favorite silent film stars, Barbara Lamarr. Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler, the arms dealer's escaped wife, was gone forever. Hedy Lamarr was born. When Hedy Lamarr arrived in Hollywood in 1938, the studio system was at its peak. MGM, the most prestigious of the studios, boasted that it had more stars than there are in heaven. Greta Garbo, Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, James Stewart, Judy Garland. These were the luminaries who walked the MGM lot. Into this constellation came Hedy, and she made an immediate impact. Her first American film, Algiers, was released in 1938. She played Gaby, a mysterious and alluring woman who captivates Charles Boyer's jewel thief in the Kasbah of Algiers. The film was a sensation, and so was Hedy. Critics and audiences were mesmerized. MGM began promoting her as the most beautiful woman in film. It was a label she would never escape, and one that would ultimately frustrate her. Throughout the late 1930s and 1940s, Hedy starred in one hit after another. In Boomtown, she appeared alongside Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy in a story about wildcatters in the Texas oil fields. In Ziegfeld Girl, she joined Judy Garland and Lana Turner in a musical drama about showgirls. In White Cargo, she played the seductive Tondaleo, a role that required her to spend much of the film in minimal clothing. Her greatest commercial success came in 1949 with Samson and Delilah, directed by Cecil B. DeMille. Playing the biblical temptress who brings down the mighty Samson, Hedy was at the height of her star power. The film became the highest-grossing movie of the year, earning over $25 million. But Hedy chafed against the limitations Hollywood placed on her. She was inevitably cast as the exotic seductress, the mysterious foreigner, the beautiful face. Rarely was she given roles that challenged her intellect or showcased her range as an actress. "Any girl can be glamorous," she famously said. "All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." It was a quote that would be repeated endlessly, usually without any understanding of the bitterness behind it. Hedy Lamarr was not stupid. She was, in fact, brilliant. But in 1940s Hollywood, no one wanted to know that. What the Hollywood publicity machine never mentioned, what the magazine profiles and fan letters never touched upon, was how Hedy spent her time away from the cameras. At her home, Hedy had set up an inventing table, a workshop where she could tinker, experiment, and create. Between takes on film sets, she would retreat to her trailer with a smaller set of equipment, sketching designs and working on ideas. She was never idle. Her mind was always turning, always working on problems. "Improving things comes naturally to me," she explained. Among the men she dated in Hollywood was Howard Hughes, not just a film producer, but also an aviation pioneer and one of the wealthiest men in America. Hughes recognized something in Hedy that most of Hollywood missed: her intellect. Hughes took her to his airplane factories. He showed her his operations. He introduced her to his scientists and engineers. And he gave her a small set of equipment to use in her trailer, encouraging her inventive spirit. One project she worked on for Hughes was airplane wing design. Hughes wanted to create faster planes that could be sold to the military. Hedy, approaching the problem with her characteristic curiosity, bought a book about fish and a book about birds. She studied the fastest creatures in each category, how their bodies were shaped for speed, how their fins and wings were designed for efficiency. Then, she combined what she learned, creating a new wing design that drew on the principles of both fish and bird aerodynamics. When she showed her sketches to Hughes, he studied them carefully. "You're a genius," he told her. She also worked on a tablet that could dissolve in water to make a soda similar to Coca-Cola, an early attempt at what we might now call a powdered drink mix. She worked on a new kind of traffic signal. Her mind ranged freely across problems and solutions, seeing connections that others missed. But her most important invention, the one that would eventually change the world, grew from her darkest memories. Those dinner conversations in Fritz Mandel's castle about torpedoes, radio control, and the problem of jamming. To understand the full scope of Hedy Lamarr's achievements, one must understand the extraordinary compartmentalization of her life. By day, she was the glamorous movie star, attending premieres, posing for photographs, delivering lines that studio executives approved. By night, she was an inventor working alone in her home laboratory, pursuing ideas that no one in Hollywood would have believed she was capable of generating. Her son Anthony Loder would later recall, "She was such a creative person. I mean, non-stop solution finding. If you talked about a problem, she had a solution." This dual existence took a psychological toll. Hedy was acutely aware of the gap between how the world perceived her and who she actually was. In interviews throughout her career, she returned again and again to this theme. The frustration of being valued only for her appearance, the impossibility of being taken seriously as an intellect in an industry that wanted only her face. "I am not ashamed to say that no man I ever met was my father's equal," she once said, "and I never loved any other man as much." The influence of Emil Kiesler, the curious banker who had walked with his daughter through the Vienna woods, explaining how machines worked, remained with her throughout her life. Every invention she attempted, every problem she tried to solve, was in some sense a continuation of those childhood conversations. Her inventive work was also, perhaps, a form of rebellion against the constraints that had defined her life. She had been trapped by Fritz Mandel in a gilded cage. She had been trapped by Hollywood in a different kind of cage, one made of glamour and contracts and the expectations of an industry that saw her as a commodity. Inventing was freedom. Inventing was her mind ranging freely, unconstrained by what others thought she should be. "All creative people want to do the unexpected," she said, and Hedy Lamarr was nothing if not creative. September 17, 1940. In the dark waters of the Atlantic, a German submarine surfaced and spotted a ship, the SS City of Benares. The passenger liner was 4 days out from Liverpool, carrying cargo, crew, passengers, and 90 children being evacuated from Britain to the safety of Canada. The U-boat torpedoed the ship. In the chaos that followed, the freezing water, the inadequate lifeboats, the hours of exposure, 77 of the 90 children died. When Hedy Lamarr heard the news in Hollywood, she was devastated. The Battle of the Atlantic was entering its deadliest phase. German U-boats were hunting in wolf packs, sinking ship after ship, threatening to strangle Britain's supply lines, and there seemed to be no way to stop them. Hedy knew from her years with Mandel that radio-controlled torpedoes were being developed by the Allies. The technology could potentially guide weapons precisely to their targets, including submarines. But she also knew the fatal flaw. Jamming, if the enemy could identify the frequency used to guide a torpedo, they could broadcast interference and send it harmlessly off course. The problem haunted her. There had to be a solution. At a Hollywood dinner party in the summer of 1940, Hedy met a man who was, in his own way, as unusual as she was. George Antheil was an avant-garde composer, a wild-haired provocateur who had scandalized concert halls across Europe with his experimental music. Antheil was famous for his ballet mécanique, a composition scored for player pianos, airplane propellers, and electric bells. The piece had caused riots at its Paris premiere in 1926. Critics called it noise. Antheil called it the future of music. The two began talking, not about music or movies, but about the war. Antheil later recalled the conversation in his memoir. Hedy said that she did not feel very comfortable, sitting there in Hollywood and making lots of money when things were in such a state. She said that she knew a good deal about new munitions and various secret weapons, some of which she had invented herself, and that she was thinking seriously of quitting MGM and going to Washington, D.C., to offer her services to the newly established Inventors Council. As they talked, Hedy explained the problem of radio-controlled torpedoes. The technology existed to guide a weapon to its target, but single-frequency signals were too easy to jam. What if, she wondered aloud, the frequency could somehow change? What if it hopped from one frequency to another in a pattern that only the transmitter and receiver knew? Anthil's eyes lit up. He understood immediately what she was proposing, and he knew exactly how to make it work. Player pianos. In his ballet mécanique, Anthil had struggled with the problem of synchronizing multiple player pianos so they would play together in perfect time. Player pianos used punched paper rolls to control which notes played, and when, a kind of early programming language. If identical rolls were placed in different pianos and started at the same moment, they would play in perfect synchronization. What if the same principle was applied to radio frequencies? You could create two identical rolls, one in the transmitter, one in the receiver. Instead of controlling piano notes, the perforations would control radio frequencies. As the rolls advanced in synchronization, both devices would hop to the same frequency at the same instant. To anyone trying to jam the signal, it would sound like random noise. But to the torpedo receiving the signal, it would be a clear, unjammable command. A standard piano has 88 keys. Anthil proposed using 88 frequencies, hopping between them in a pattern determined by the punched rolls. The signal would only stay on each frequency long enough to transmit a brief burst of information before jumping to the next one. It would be virtually impossible to jam all 88 frequencies simultaneously. They had invented what we now call frequency hopping spread spectrum technology. To fully appreciate the genius of Lamarr and Anthil's invention, it helps to understand the technical problem they were solving and the elegance of their solution. Radio communication in the 1940s was relatively simple. A transmitter sent a signal on a specific frequency. A receiver tuned to that same frequency picked it up. It was like two people having a conversation on a single telephone line. The problem was that anyone who knew which line you were using could listen in, or, more dangerously for military applications, could broadcast noise on that line and drown out your signal entirely. This was jamming, and it was the Achilles heel of any radio-controlled weapon system. If the Allies developed torpedoes that could be guided by radio to their targets, the Axis powers could simply jam the control signals. The torpedoes would go off course, miss their targets, and the technology would be useless. Lamarr's insight was to make the frequency unpredictable. Instead of transmitting on a single frequency, why not spread the signal across many frequencies, changing rapidly and randomly? If the transmitter and receiver both knew the pattern of changes, if they were synchronized, they could communicate perfectly, while anyone trying to jam the signal would have to guess which frequency to target at any given millisecond. Anthil's contribution was the synchronization mechanism. The player piano rolls he had worked with were essentially early forms of programming, mechanical instructions that could be followed simultaneously by different machines. By creating identical rolls for the transmitter and receiver, starting them at the same time, they could ensure that both devices jumped to the same frequency at the same instant. The beauty of the system was its mathematical simplicity. With 88 frequencies available and rapid hopping between them, an enemy trying to jam the signal would face an impossible task. They couldn't jam all 88 frequencies at once. That would require too much power. And they couldn't predict which frequency to jam at any given moment, because the pattern was known only to the transmitter and receiver. It was, in essence, an early form of encryption applied not to the content of a message, but to the channel carrying it. The message itself might be a simple command, turn left or turn right, but by spreading it across a constantly shifting range of frequencies, it became secure. This was the fundamental insight that would later make Bluetooth possible. That would secure military communications for decades. That would enable Wi-Fi networks to function reliably even in environments with significant interference. And it came from a movie star and a composer, working in the margins of their real careers. Lamarr and Anthil worked feverishly on their invention through the fall of 1940. They submitted their initial ideas to the National Inventors Council in December of that year. The council was impressed enough to connect Antheil with Samuel Stuart Macione, a professor of electrical engineering at the California Institute of Technology, who helped refine the technical specifications. Hedy, demonstrating the same business acumen she had used to negotiate her MGM contract, hired the Los Angeles law firm of Lyon and Lyon to draft the patent application. On June 10, 1941, she and Antheil formally filed for a patent on their secret communication system. The application was filed under her legal name at the time, Hedy Lamarr. She was then married to her second husband, screenwriter Gene Markey. On August 11, 1942, they were granted the patent. The patent drawings show the elegant simplicity of their solution. Two synchronized mechanisms controlling frequency changes, allowing a transmitter and receiver to hop through a sequence of frequencies in perfect coordination. The patent was classified, kept secret for its potential military value. And then the Navy said no. The United States Navy examined Lamarr and Antheil's invention and rejected it. Their stated reason was that the mechanism would be too bulky to fit inside a torpedo. Some officers apparently imagined that the inventors literally wanted to put a player piano inside the weapon. The real reasons may have been more complex. The military establishment of the 1940s was not accustomed to receiving viable inventions from Hollywood actresses and avant-garde composers. There was institutional skepticism about outsider innovations. And perhaps there was simple sexism, a refusal to believe that a woman who looked like Hedy Lamarr could have invented anything of military value. The Navy's advice to Hedy was blunt. She could do more for the war effort by selling war bonds. And so she did. Hedy threw herself into the bond campaign with characteristic determination. She traveled to 16 cities in 10 days, making appearances, signing autographs, and using her celebrity to raise money for the war effort. At one bond rally, she raised $7 million in a single night, reportedly by offering to kiss any man who bought $25,000 in bonds. She also donated her patent to the Navy outright. Neither she nor Antheil would ever receive a penny for their invention. The patent sat in a file, classified and unused, for nearly 20 years. The Lamarr-Antheil patent expired in 1959, 3 years before anyone would use the technology. George Antheil died that same year, never knowing that his collaboration with a movie star would eventually transform the world. But the principles of frequency hopping didn't disappear. In the late 1950s, engineers at Sylvania Corporation were developing new electronic systems when they came across the old Lamarr-Antheil patent. They recognized its value and began implementing the concepts using modern transistor technology, far more compact and reliable than the original player piano mechanism. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States Navy finally deployed frequency hopping technology. American ships carrying torpedoes with radio guidance systems used the principle Lamarr and Antheil had patented 20 years earlier to communicate without fear of jamming. The technology was also used in sonobuoys, devices dropped from aircraft to detect enemy submarines. By the 1960s and 1970s, frequency hopping had become a standard tool in military communications. It was used to secure voice communications in the Vietnam War. It was incorporated into satellite systems. It became a cornerstone of secure military networking, and then it went civilian. The principle of spread spectrum communication, of which frequency hopping is a key variant, turned out to have applications far beyond torpedo guidance. By spreading a signal across multiple frequencies, you could reduce interference, improve security, and allow multiple devices to share the same spectrum without colliding. In 1997, the IEEE 802.11, the foundation of what we now call Wi-Fi, incorporated spread spectrum technology. Early Wi-Fi networks used frequency hopping to transmit data reliably in the 2.4 GHz band. The principle that Lamarr and Antheil had conceived for guiding torpedoes was now being used to connect laptops to the internet. Bluetooth, the technology that connects your wireless headphones to your phone, uses frequency hopping. It jumps between 79 different frequencies, 16 zero times per second. A direct descendant of the 88 frequency system, Lamarr and Antheil proposed in 1941. GPS satellites use spread spectrum technology to transmit their signals. So do cell phone networks. So do cordless phones, baby monitors, and countless other wireless devices that have become part of everyday life. The woman who invented the technology never received a cent for it. The patent had expired years before its commercial applications became apparent. But without Hedy Lamarr's insight, without the connections she drew between the conversations at her arms dealer husband's dinner table and the music-playing mechanisms of player pianos, the wireless world we live in today might look very different. The modern implementations of frequency hopping are vastly more sophisticated than the original Lamarr-Antheil design, but the core principle remains unchanged. Spread your signal across multiple frequencies to avoid interference and improve security. In Bluetooth, for example, devices hop across 79 different channels in the 2.4 GHz band, changing frequencies 16 zero times per second. The pattern of hopping is determined by algorithms that both the transmitter and receiver know, a digital version of Lamarr and Antheil's synchronized piano rolls. This allows multiple Bluetooth devices to coexist in the same space without interfering with each other. Each pair of devices is essentially having its conversation in a rapidly changing private channel. Wi-Fi networks use related spread spectrum techniques to achieve similar benefits. The 2.4 GHz band that early Wi-Fi networks used is crowded with signals from all manner of devices, not just computers, but also microwave ovens, cordless phones, baby monitors, and countless other appliances. By spreading data across a wider range of frequencies, Wi-Fi can maintain reliable connections even in this noisy environment. GPS satellites transmit their positioning signals using spread spectrum technology, which allows the relatively weak signals from space to be picked up by receivers on Earth despite all the radio noise of the modern world. Military communication systems use frequency hopping to prevent enemy forces from intercepting or jamming critical messages. In each case, the fundamental insight is the same one Hedy Lamarr articulated in 1940. By rapidly changing frequencies in a pattern known only to sender and receiver, you can communicate securely and reliably even in hostile or crowded electromagnetic environments. The estimated economic value of the technologies derived from spread spectrum communication runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. The industries it enables, wireless networking, mobile communications, satellite navigation, are foundational to the modern economy. And while the implementations have evolved far beyond what Lamarr and Antheil could have imagined, the principle they patented in 1942 remains at the heart of how our wireless world functions. By the 1960s, Hedy Lamarr's film career had faded. Her final film, The Female Animal, was released in 1958. She received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960, recognition for her contributions to cinema, though not yet for her contributions to science. Her personal life had been turbulent. She married 6 times. She adopted a son and had 2 biological children. She struggled with prescription drug addiction. She was arrested for shoplifting twice, though never convicted, incidents that suggested underlying psychological struggles. In 1966, she published her autobiography, Ecstasy and Me, My Life as a Woman. The book was sensationalist, filled with scandalous stories that Hedy later claimed were fabricated or exaggerated by her ghostwriters. She sued the publishers, calling the book fictional, false, vulgar, scandalous, libelous, and obscene. As the years passed, Hedy became increasingly reclusive. She moved to Florida, settling in Castleberry, a quiet community north of Orlando. She rarely left her home, preferring to maintain relationships through the telephone. Hours-long conversations with friends and family became her primary social connection. Meanwhile, the technology she had invented was transforming the world, and almost no one knew she had anything to do with it. The rediscovery of Hedy Lamarr, the inventor, came gradually, driven by researchers and journalists who stumbled across the old patent and were astonished to see a famous actress's name on it. In the 1990s, as wireless technology began its explosive growth, the story began to spread. Here was a tale tailor-made for the information age. A beautiful woman, dismissed by the establishment, who had invented the principles underlying the connected world. In 1997, when Hedy was 82 years old, she and George Antheil, posthumously, were jointly honored with the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award. The F recognized their invention as a crucial step in the development of secure wireless communications. Hedy was too frail to attend the ceremony in person. Her son Anthony accepted the award on her behalf, but he played a recorded message from his mother, in which she acknowledged the honor and expressed satisfaction that her work was finally being recognized. "It's about time," she reportedly said when informed of the award. In 1998, her native Austria awarded her the Victor Kaplan Medal from the Austrian Association of Patent Holders and Inventors. The girl who had fled Vienna in 1937 was finally being celebrated in her homeland. In a 1990 interview for Forbes magazine, recorded before the awards but unearthed and treasured afterward, Hedy reflected on her inventive mind. "I was different, I guess. Maybe I came from a different planet. Who knows? But whatever it is, inventions are easy for me to do." She also offered a characteristically candid assessment of what she valued. "The brains of people are more interesting than the looks, I think." On January 19, 2000, Hedy Lamarr was found dead in her Florida home. She was 85 years old. The cause of death was heart disease. In accordance with her wishes, her son Anthony brought part of her ashes to Vienna. He scattered them in the Vienna woods, the same forests where she had walked with her father nearly a century before, learning about machines and technology, developing the curiosity that would one day change the world. In 2014, the remainder of her ashes were interred in Vienna's Central Cemetery, where a memorial was unveiled in her honor. The girl who had escaped Austria to flee fascism was home at last. That same year, Hedy Lamarr was posthumously inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame for her development of frequency hopping, spread spectrum technology. She joined the ranks of Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, the Wright brothers, and other luminaries of American innovation. Today, the technology that Hedy Lamarr helped invent is everywhere. When you connect to a Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop, you're using principles derived from spread spectrum technology. When you pair your smartphone with wireless earbuds via Bluetooth, the connection hops between frequencies just as Lamarr and Antheil envisioned. When you use GPS navigation to find your way to an unfamiliar destination, the satellites guiding you are transmitting via spread spectrum. The value of these technologies is almost incalculable. Estimates suggest that the wireless industry, which depends heavily on spread spectrum techniques, is worth trillions of dollars. Frequency hopping alone has been valued at over $30 billion. Hedy Lamarr never received a penny for any of it, but her legacy extends beyond technology. Her story has become a touchstone for discussions about women in STEM fields, about the barriers that talented women have faced throughout history, and about the assumptions we make about intelligence and beauty. In 2015, on the 101st anniversary of her birth, Google honored Hedy with an animated Google Doodle that depicted both her acting career and her scientific achievements. The image showed her at her inventing table, surrounded by patents and ideas, finally recognized as the complete person she always was. In 2017, the documentary Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story, brought her full biography to a new generation. Produced by Susan Sarandon and directed by Alexandra Dean, the film used newly discovered audio recordings of Hedy's own voice to tell her story, including her frustration at being seen only as a beautiful face. November 9, Hedy's birthday, is now celebrated in some regions as Hedy Lamarr Day or Inventors Day, a recognition that genius can come from unexpected places, and that the most beautiful mind may be hidden behind the most beautiful face. The story of Hedy Lamarr is ultimately a story about perception, about who we see when we look at someone and what we might be missing. The world looked at Hedy Lamarr and saw a face. An impossibly beautiful face, yes, but just a face. The Hollywood studio system saw a commodity to be marketed. The United States Navy saw an actress who should stick to selling war bonds. Even many of her admirers saw only the glamorous image projected on movie screens. What they missed was the 5-year-old girl taking apart her music box to understand how it worked. They missed the child walking through the Vienna woods with her father, learning about machines and technology. They missed the young woman absorbing technical knowledge at an arms dealer's dinner table, filing it away for future use. They missed the tireless inventor, sketching ideas between film takes, working late into the night on problems that fascinated her. They missed the mind. Hedy herself understood this better than anyone. "Any girl can be glamorous," she said. "All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." It was a bitter joke, aimed at a world that refused to see past her appearance. But she also said something more hopeful. "The brains of people are more interesting than the looks, I think." History, eventually, came to agree with her. The wireless world we inhabit today, the world of constant connectivity, of instantaneous communication, of GPS navigation and Bluetooth headphones and Wi-Fi networks, owes a debt to the brilliant woman who looked like a movie star because she was one. Hedy Lamarr was not just the most beautiful woman in the world. She was also one of the most innovative minds of her era. And perhaps the greatest lesson of her life is the simplest one. Never assume you know everything about a person just by looking at them. You might be looking at a genius. Hedy Lamarr's life was full of contradictions that make her story both compelling and instructive. She was a woman who fled fascism and then spent years in the gilded cage of Hollywood stardom. She was an inventor whose greatest creation was ignored in her lifetime and then transformed the world after her death. She was celebrated as the most beautiful woman in the world and yet yearned to be recognized for her mind. These contradictions reveal something important about the nature of genius and the societies that produce it. Genius doesn't always come from expected places. It doesn't always look the way we expect it to look, and it is often constrained by the prejudices and assumptions of its time. Hedy Lamarr had the misfortune to be born into an era when women were rarely taken seriously as inventors or engineers. She had the additional misfortune to be extraordinarily beautiful, a quality that, paradoxically, made it even harder for people to see her intelligence. In a different time, or with a different face, her contributions to technology might have been recognized immediately. But she also had the good fortune to be raised by a father who believed in her, to escape from circumstances that could have destroyed her, and to live long enough to see the beginning of the recognition she deserved. The story of Hedy Lamarr carries lessons that remain relevant today. First, it reminds us that innovation can come from anywhere. The most important contributions often come from people working outside the traditional structures of their fields. The actress who understood radio technology, the composer who knew about synchronizing player pianos. Diversity of perspective drives creativity. The connections that Lamarr and Anthell made came precisely because they were outsiders approaching the problem from unexpected angles. Second, Lamarr's story is a cautionary tale about the assumptions we make about intelligence. We are quick to categorize people, to assume that someone who looks a certain way or works in a certain field cannot possibly be brilliant in other ways. These assumptions are not just unfair to the individuals they constrain, they are costly to society as a whole. How many Hedy Lamarrs have been ignored because they didn't fit the mold of what an inventor was supposed to look like? Third, her story illustrates the often delayed nature of recognition for important work. The frequency hopping system that Lamarr and Antheil invented was ahead of its time. The technology needed to implement it practically didn't exist in 1942. Many important ideas arrive before the world is ready for them. This is frustrating for the inventors, but it reminds us that the value of an idea is not always apparent immediately. Sometimes it takes decades for the world to catch up. Finally, Lamarr's life demonstrates the importance of persistence and self-belief in the face of rejection. The Navy told her to stick to selling war bonds. Hollywood told her to stand still and look pretty. She did both of those things, and she also continued to invent, continued to think, continued to pursue the life of the mind that had been cultivated in those walks through the Vienna woods with her father. She never let the world's limited view of her become her own view of herself.